Hi everyone, welcome to our video lecture about integumentary system, and I was hoping to have both these lectures in our in-person class, but because of this inclement weather we are just not able to do that. So I have decided to have a 30 to 40 minute discussion about the first 13 slides. I'm not sure how long will it go because it's an online recording, so I can't calculate time exactly. But let's see how it goes. And then I'll have another lecture of again 30 minutes for our class on Wednesday. So as you have seen in my email that our idea is to finish integumentary system, all the terms related to this particular system in our class last Wednesday on 15th and tomorrow on I think 17th. So let's see how it goes. Now, this is a difficult system because we will come across a lot of terms which are complicated, and we will discuss all the systems from now on as we have learned our basics in our first module, that we'll talk about the structure and function of that particular system here, integumentary system in particular. We'll try to pronounce, spell, and build words related to that particular system. And then in the second half, we will talk about the pathologies. We'll talk about the diseases, a lot of diagnosis, some related procedures which are both diagnostic and therapeutic. And I always have a slide related to the drugs specific to that particular system at the end, but that's very short. That's just one slide in most of the systems. So let's make a start and let's see how it goes. Now, the first thing is that integument means skin. So this is just a trivia that skin is the largest organ in our body. Once we think about organs, we think, okay, we have liver, we have stomach, we have spleen, but skin is actually an organ because it covers our body, and technically it is the largest organ of our body. And once we talk about integumentary, then it pertains to not only skin, but it also includes all its appendages or related or accessory structures that include hair, nail, and glands. Now, this is a big complex diagram and there are a lot of terms here. So I will go over each of them slowly, and then we'll have some sort of exercise after this diagram to make sure that we learn all these terms nicely. So some of the terms you might know in advance and some of them are new. So let's see. Okay, so first we'll talk about epidermis. That is really simple. You know from your previous knowledge that epi means before or on top or above, and if it's on top of the dermis, that is epidermis. So that includes this layer of cells and some of the part which is here. So this includes epidermis. Now if we look really close into this layer, then the top part that includes only the top layer of cells, that is stratum corneum. So that's the topmost part of epidermis. And the lowermost part, if you can see these structures, they form the basal layer. So basically this epidermis along with stratum corneum is built on this basic layer. So this part is epidermis, with that includes stratum corneum and that part, and it is built on top of this basal layer. After that, from here up till this part, we have the dermis, and we all know that dermis means skin. So because this part is on top of dermis, that is epidermis. And then we have the subcutaneous tissue. Now again, you want to see the term sub. This prefix means below or inferior, and cutaneous again means skin. So we have learned two terms in skin if you remember your previous discussions. So one of them is derma and the other one is cutaneous. So this tissue is below the dermis, that is why it's subcutaneous. And to be specific, tissue is a combination of cells. So in this case, this tissue is adipose tissue because it is made up of fat cells. So this tissue, subcutaneous one in this case, is made up of fat tissues. Okay, now you have a few glands here, and the name of the first one is sudoriferous glands or sweat glands. So this term, as we'll see in our later slide, this means sweat. So we have this coil structure which makes sweat, and that will be that has a pore. You can see here, and it is through these glands that whenever we feel warm or hot, we sweat, and the sweat comes out on top of the skin through this pore, and inside it we have this sweat gland. Then we have a sebaceous gland, and I want you to differentiate between this word sebaceous, which means oil, and this word sudoriferous, which is sweat. So these are a couple of glands which are present. So once we say that our skin is oily, it means that we have numerous sebaceous glands in it. And we'll discuss a few diseases related to sebaceous gland in just a bit. And then we have this hair shaft. So this is just a hair, so that's not a big issue. And on inside we have this hair follicle. And I want you to look at this term papilla, which means it's a protrusion. So if you see papilla in our intestine or maybe on the tongue, which are different forms of papillae, it means it is a protrusion or a projection technically. So we have learned a lot of terms here, and I want to very quickly recapitulate before we move on. So this system is the integumentary system, which is about skin and its related structure or appendages. So we have dermis in the middle. On top we have epidermis, which has a layer of stratum corneum. Then we have subcutaneous tissue, which is below the dermis. We have a couple of glands, the sudoriferous gland and the sebaceous glands. We have the hair follicle, we have hair on the top, and this subcutaneous tissue is made up of fat, which is the adipose tissue. And we have an arteriole, a venule, and a nerve. So we have these three structures also present here, but this is not specifically related to integumentary system, so I'm not going to pay much attention to it. So keeping this whole backdrop in mind, let's move on and discuss some of these terms individually. So skin, just a revision, it can be cutaneous, derma, or dermal, or dermat. So these are the three terms which are used for skin. You already know that. Now, sebum or sebaceous are the terms which are related to oil, and that we have learned in our previous slide. So if you have a gland which produces oil, these are sebaceous glands. Then we have hair, which is somewhat said to be pilo. Now, please make sure that you differentiate between PILO from this word, which is PYLO, because this term refers to kidney. So once we talk about kidney, you will learn about pyelonephritis and all that, those sort of terms. So please make sure that if it's PILO, that's hair. And once we talk about this hair, one of the common muscles which comes into our mind, the common one, is the piloerector muscles, which are present on our skin. It's also present in a lot of mammals. So when we have any sort of fear, we have those goosebumps. So the hair will stand, and that is due to the contraction of piloerector muscles. Now, once we talk about sweat, apart from sebum, that's about the or the more common term is hydro. And we'll talk about this hydro in terms of hydrosis. Please ignore, um, this is so complicated to use. So hydrosis means sweating. And if you have absence of hydrosis, that's ahydrosis or sometimes anhydrosis, because we know a or an is absence. Then we have learned that for fat we use the term adipo. We have used it before. Sometimes we use the term lipo. And another term which I want to introduce here is this steto, which, and the commonest one is steatorrhea, which is the presence of fat in stool or feces. So sometimes you hear this term steatorrhea. It's RRHOEA. So that's the presence of fat in either stool or feces. Nerve, that's too straightforward. Neuro, you know that. Arteriole, it's just an extension of the artery. So once we talk about the cardiovascular system, we'll talk that there are main arteries which just branch into thick arterioles, which are responsible for providing resistance to our blood flow. So these are some minute structures of our vascular system. And another term which I want to talk about is dry or scaly, and this word is ichthyol. So please make sure that ichthyol somewhat refers to a structure which is there on the fish skin. So you can remember all the scales which are present on the skin of the fish. So those scaly appearance is said to be ichthyol. It's not an extremely common term in medicine, but sometimes it is used. All right, let's move to some more terms. Now, this word kerato comes from the word or protein, to be specific, that is keratin. So this keratin protein makes skin or surfaces hard. So there is a very common inflammation which is keratitis. So you know that itis is inflammation. So if because of the inflammation, if the skin goes hard, that's keratitis. Now another term for dry, we have seen in our previous slide that ichthyol. Another word is zero. So please make sure that we have two terms for dry. One is zero and one is ichthyol. And the common examples of the zero is xerosis. And this is a very common term used in context of eye. So if you have dryness of cornea, which is this part, then that's corneal xerosis. And if you have this conjunctiva, which goes dry, that's conjunctival xerosis. So the zero, which starts from X instead of Z, that is dry, and the other one is ichthyol. So depending upon appearance, these terms vary. Now another term is sclero, which is again hardening. So for hardening, you again have a couple of terms. The kerato, which comes from the word protein, keratin, and the other word is sclero. And the most common example is scleroderma. And you know that derma is skin. So in few diseases, you have you have hard skin, and that scleroderma. And by the way, it's written that sclera is referred to as the white part of the eye. So this part, this white part, this is sclera. So please make sure that we have a couple of words for dry, we have a couple of words for hard, that kerato and sclero, and we have zero and ichthyol. Now, this is a quick exercise. You may pause the video for a few seconds and try to think of these words, and I'll just take a pause of maybe 30 seconds and then we look at these answers. The first one is about abnormal. condition without sweat. Treatment with cold, that might be a new term. Resembling skin, that's too easy. And pertaining under the skin, you know that. I hope so after our first module. All right, I hope you have come up with some answers. So the abnormal condition without sweat is N, which is absent, hydrosis, which is sweat. So if it's hydrosis, that's sweating. If it's absence of sweating, that's anhydrosis. And this is a new term, so I won't expect you to answer this question. Cryo is about cold, and therapy is treatment. So the prefix which is used here for cold is cryo. We have cryotherapy in the form of cryosurgery, which is a very common surgery going on nowadays because of its advantages, where they freeze the tissue and then go for the surgery to avoid bleeding, which happens at the normal temperature. So if it's too cold, then the blood will freeze out. So it basically minimizes the amount of blood loss. Resembling skin is dermoid, and pertaining under the skin, I'm pretty sure that you know this prefix sub, which is under or inferior or below, and cutaneous is pertaining to skin. So if something pertains to under the skin, that's subcutaneous. Now, this is another exercise where you have abnormal condition of skin. We talked about this term cyanosis in all those 5 boxes where we have red box, erythro, white, leuco, and all that stuff. So the blue one is cyanosis. And the condition of sweat, if you remembered, one of the terms for sweat was hydrosis and the other one was sudorosis. So if you remembered, in our first diagram, there was a gland where I talked that it's a sudoriferous gland. So that word sudor is about sweat. So please make sure that we have 2 words for sweat. The first one is hydro, and because hydro means water, and then the other one is sudro. So if you see these terms, then just start thinking about sweat in context of skin. Then this is an interesting term which means softening of nails, onychomalacia. So onycho is basically means nail, and malacia is softening. So you have softening of bones, which is more common, and that's osteo, which is bone, and malacia, which is again softening. So you can have softening of bone as osteomalacia, you have softening of nail, which is onychomalacia. Then there are again a few terms which you know from before, and some of them are new. So if you remembered again those color boxes, the white cells are the leukocytes, because leuco is white, cyte is cell, so we have leukocytes at the white cell, and black is melano. So if you remembered, we have actually used 3 of our 5 examples where what we have discussed a few weeks ago. So the red one was erythro, we haven't talked it here. White one was leuco, black one was melano, and the blue one, which was just there before this slide, is cyno. And the skin that is dry is xeroderma. And I think I've talked about it, that skin is derma and xero is dry, and I've talked about xerosis in a couple of slides before, which is dryness, because normally our eye is kept moist by lacrimal fluid secretion. So if the cornea is dry, that's corneal xerosis. If the conjunctiva is dry, that's conjunctival xerosis. And if the skin is dry, that's xeroderma. Transplant, I think we have talked about this homo, which means same, and grafting is transplant. And if it's different, that's heterograft. and homo is also known as allograft. So these are a couple of synonyms. Tumor, if you remember, we have talked oma is tumor, and if it's a tumor which is carcinogenic or a metastatic tumor, that is carcinoma. So please make sure that oma means tumor and carcin word comes from cancer. So these are some of the terms which particularly relates to some of the conditions and diseases related to skin and its nearby structures. Now talking about a few more terms. Now the skin which is associated with pus, that's pyoderma. Derma is skin and pyo means pus. And if you remember from one of the exam questions, pus is, also known as suppuration. So I want you at this stage where we are almost 1/3 into our course, you should know that if the word pus comes somewhere, it can either be suppuration or it has to be pyo, which is easy to remember. Discharge was rhea, and we have talked about diarrhea in one of our lectures before. Here is the sebum which is flowing, and that is why that's seborrhea. So please make sure that diarrhea means that your feces is loose, you're having loose motions, and if there's flowing sebum, that's seborrhea. Treatment with cold cryotherapy, we just saw that. Dry skin ichthyosis, especially the scaly one, pertaining to the fish-like skin, and if it's pertaining to heat, that's thermal, because AL means pertaining to, and heat is about thermogenic, so pertaining to heat is thermal. Now, we have so far covered some of the anatomical and physiological terms, a few symptoms related to some skin diseases, but now we'll talk about some very specific skin diseases. So dermatology is a branch of medicine which deals with the study of skin diseases. So derma is skin, logy is study, so study of skin and its related diseases is dermatology. Please ignore these terms, this is just a picture, and we will look into some of the specific diseases in our next slide. Now, this is a complicated slide. There are so many terms, papule, nodule, tumor, wheal, vesicle, and a lot of detail is given. So I was trying to look for something which will be really interesting for you to remember. And I think before reading this slide, the best way is to watch this video. It's a couple of minutes, but it really explains nicely about a lot of these lesions related to the skin, because some of them are pretty close to each other. The terminology is complicated, so I want you to watch this video, and once you are done with the video, I think you'll be really prepared well to explain all these terms. So let's listen to this video and let's see.
Welcome back. So for all dermatology fans, this video basically explains how to describe skin lesions and differentiate between them. We'll start with change in color. So if the lesion is less than 1 centimeter, it's going to be called a macule. And if it's more than 1 centimeter, it's going to be called a patch. And note that macules and patches are both flat, so the only difference is change in color. Next we have raised lesions. So basically if the lesion is small, less than 0.5 centimeter, it's going to be called a papule. And if it's large, more than 0.5 centimeter, it's going to be called a plaque. So basically a papule is a raised lesion of the skin that is less than 0.5 centimeter. And a plaque is a raised lesion of the skin that is more than 0.5 centimeter. Note that papules can infect or have pus inside them, and they're going to be called a pustule if it contains pus inside. Next we have nodules and cysts. They're both large fluid sacs, and the only difference between them is that nodules have most of their content in deep layers of the skin, while cysts have most of their content in the superficial layers of the skin. Next, we have vesicles and bulla, and they're both small fluid sacs. Vesicles tend to be larger in number but smaller in size. Bulla is the opposite, which is larger in size and smaller in number. And one of the most important secondary skin lesions are scaling and crusts. Basically, scaling is thickening of the outer layer of the skin, and crust is dried pus or dried bulla or dried fluid, basically, on top of erosion or on top of the skin. Other secondary lesions, we have fissures and ulcers. They both penetrate the skin to the deep layers. Fissures are usually cut in shape, and ulcers are circular in shape. Alright guys, so that's everything I've got today. I'm not going to go into details about what diseases.
So I think we'll stop here as far as our first video is concerned, and I thought that we have discussed a lot of terms, and I'll start with burns in our second video, which again has a lot of terms coming up. So just take a break, and once you are ready, try to recapitulate and revise these terms before moving on to our second video for the Wednesday's class. Thank you very much, and if you have questions, feel free to email me. Thank you.